today is the Walker family history, and Janeen Walker and Beth Walker are going to be doing this. I've had the opportunity. I've known, oh gosh, Janeen and I have known each other for years, and we've gotten together a couple times the last couple of weeks and just had some real good talks. And it's taken us a few cancellations and things to get here, but we're here, and I'm so excited for this. So I am so impressed with the turnout today. This has been good. So I will turn it over to Janeen, and then they can move on from there. Thanks.
Am I supposed to use this mic or this one?
You'll use that one up
All
there.
right.
Ross can use.
I'd like to thank you all for coming today, and I would like to thank Richard, because without Richard, none of these programs would happen. And so it's been good for me, because I've been doing a lot of tote digging and calling, and anyway, and I've got to spend some quality time with my Aunt Beth, who's my dad, Bruce Walker's twin sister. And I'm going to introduce her now to come up and say a few words. Or would you like me to just hand you the mic? What would you like to do? Come on up. Yeah.
It's always nice to come home. Can you hear? No?
And I can't see you. Whoops, just come stand right here. They can't see you with the computer screen open. Can you see her now?
I
No?
can't see anybody.
Here, take Ross's. Come over here.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
Yeah, take Ross's mic.
That's better. Thank you.
There we go. All right.
Well, it's always nice to come home, and I see a lot of friends. I forget names. Sometimes I wonder if I can remember my own. But anyway, coming to Sturgis with nice, friendly people. And this facility, this library, is wonderful. It has something for every age group. And when Bruce and Herm and I were growing up, the Sturgis Library was in the basement of the old auditorium down on Main Street. And the mayor's wife was the librarian, France Atwater. And there was just a little corner for the library. It wasn't the whole basement. And France was the only one that worked there. But this is quite an improvement. There was not very many books down there or anything else. Yeah. And it's nice to be here, see all of you.
Thank you. We're going to give.
I'm going to give this to Janeen. She's actually going to do the history. And if you know Janeen, she likes to talk, and she does a pretty good job of it. So here you go.
Actually, give that one to Ross, because I have this one right here. That's when we have questions. So thank you, Aunt Beth. And for the record, that's my father, Bruce Walker's twin sister. And she's a young 94. I hope you don't mind me saying that, but I'm impressed. I'm impressed by that. Yeah. And my mother, Carol Walker, who wasn't able to be with us today, she's not quite as spry, but anyway, she gets to watch this online someday. I'll turn it on. Anyway, thank you all for coming. And I'm not a historian, so please forgive me, and I hope I get most of these things right. So we're just going to start with a slideshow. The Walkers got here via, if we're going to go way back in the Walker history, this was my Grandpa Walker's grandfather, who came from Holland and settled in Pennsylvania. And I'm going to look, I have to put my glasses on here. And then this to the side is my Grandpa Walker's parents, J.O. Walker and Mary Jennings. And they lived in Davenport, Nebraska. That was their wedding picture. So this is pictures of their children, of which one on the far right is my Grandpa Walker, Harold Walker. Okay. Yep. And then they had some more children after that. So you see Mary Ellen and Burdette, who's otherwise known as Robert. And this is my Grandpa Walker's younger siblings. Mary Ellen Walker later married Harold Anderson of H.O. Anderson and Sons Hardware. So the Walkers have liked banking and hardware. And this is when my great-grandpa Walker left Pennsylvania, they came out and settled in Ong, Nebraska. And he had a hardware store. So this is a picture of his hardware store, and I'm guessing it was a grand opening of some sort. And then this to the right was their home in Ong, Nebraska, and in one of their vehicles. And so this is a picture of my grandpa Walker in the car with his siblings, and you can identify them with by the caption. And then this is another picture of them many years later, but this is my grandpa Walker's mother's side of the family. So off to the far right is Herman Pug, and he's pretty important with how my grandpa Walker got to Sturgis. So the Jennings had as much to do with the Walker settling in Sturgis as anything else. So I'm going to finish this story. I'm going to make sure the right thing came up. Oh, so this is a marriage license for my grandpa and grandma Walker, of which I could not find a wedding picture. So anyway, I don't know. Sometimes those things get lost. And this was a picture of the Bear Butte Valley Bank, which most people relate my grandpa Walker to, because when he came to Sturgis, this was the bank that he came to work in and later purchased. And before that, it was known as the Meade County Bank. We're going to possibly do a bank history someday, but here's some old checks and a report of the Meade County Bank. And there was not a lot of money in there at the time compared to today. So I'm just going to flash through these so I don't take too much time. And this is just some other recounting of the Meade County Bank. And then it transferred to the First National Bank in Deadwood. They worked together. And then the Bear Butte Valley Bank that's who my grandpa Walker was, with Uncle Pug Jennings invested in that. And over here was my grandpa Walker in the middle with the big cigar in his mouth. I never remember him ever smoking the cigar, but he chewed them. And he had kind of a gruff manner, but he had a big heart, so it was a typical banker with the cigar in his. But this was a South Dakota Banking Association and other people involved. And this is at the Walker cabin in Vanacker Canyon that my grandpa Walker built with the Grams family. And it still stands. We've kept it up. And anyway, it's half logs. And people always said, why is it just half logs? I said, because it probably cost my grandpa half as much. Yeah. Anyway, and that's another whole story. Beth could tell those stories because Graham's actually set up a sawmill up there, and those were timbers off the land. And I think it took them about 7 years to build it. And my dad was little then, but they do remember, with watching the cabin go up. And I probably shouldn't tell some of these off-color stories, but this is such a funny one that my grandpa Walker used to tell. So one of the gentlemen that worked on the cabin, I think his name was Lewis Clark, and he got his last paycheck, and he went to Deadwood, and he had a heart attack in the whorehouse. And died. Yeah, and died. And so the only evidence they brought the wallet down to the Bear Butte Valley Bank to ask my grandpa Walker, and he says, well, yeah, and so he found his heirs, but anyway, she didn't steal any money, so my grandpa always said, well, she was an honest whore. He probably wouldn't want me telling you that story, but anyway, I always thought that was such a cool story that we should have it framed somewhere, right? It was the Old West. Yeah, I just always thought that was a fun, because my grandpa Walker, he had a good sense of humor too, and he didn't tell many stories, but that was some of them. Anyway, yeah. So, bless you, Grandpa and Lewis Clark. We came across all these war rations, and I just had to share them with you because I remember my parents talking about war rations, which many of you in here had to abide by. And so this is World War II war rations that I found in the tote. And I know that's not really pertinent just to the Walker family, but I thought it was very interesting to see that you could have so much of something. And so I can see a lot of people pointing those out and remembering those, right? Yeah. Maybe we'll have a history thing on that someday. And these pictures didn't scan very well, but this is the closest to a wedding picture I would get from my grandpa and grandma Walker, because that's them with their twins, Bruce and Beth. And Bruce and Beth were born in 1930, and back before sonograms and all that kind of stuff, they just thought they were having a baby. And so when when the nurse came out and said, well, you're having the second one, I guess my grandpa Walker almost passed out. But anyway, people say, how much older is Bruce than Beth? And he always said 5 minutes. So these are the infamous Walker twins of Sturgis, South Dakota, and they were naughty when they were little. We'll tell some naughty stories. I believe that. Yeah. Yeah. I know when I was born, my sisters are 6 and 7 years older than me, and when they brought me home, Susan, my older sister, said, we wanted a little baby. And my dad said, well, here she is, 9 pounds and 10 ounces and a head the size of a, yeah, anyway. Yeah, I had to be big to stand out to my sisters. That's how that went. So here's some pictures of Bruce and Beth on their tricycles, and this is Bruce and Beth, and then their younger brother Herman, who was what 4 years younger than you, 5 years younger. Okay, and then this is Bruce and Beth's graduation picture with is that Junior Harrison? Clarence Harrison. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Junior. hmm And then this would be my dad on the far left at a branding. And anybody that knew my dad, what he really wanted to be was a rancher, but he was an ag banker. But this is him at a branding. And in the middle is my grandpa Walker when he was still up in Montana. And I'm not sure what claim shack he's in front of there, but that's him when he was a younger trimmer man and could get on a horse anyway, right? And then after the far right is my dad and my grandpa, and they both loved to fish. And my dad passed that fishing on to my kids too. And I never really loved to fish. I like to cook it, but I'm a little impatient for fishing, I guess. I don't know. Um, this next picture is my mom and dad, Bruce and Carol Walker, at their wedding, and it was the old Presbyterian church. And people in those days got married on Sunday. I didn't realize that. And then this picture on the right is their 50th wedding anniversary, which we had at the auditorium. And even though my mother said she didn't want a party, she did. So we did it. And this is a picture of my family at my mom and dad's 50th wedding anniversary. And my sister Susan lives in Las Vegas. So this was taken at one of the casinos there. So I will go through the back. So I'll go through the front. It's my mom and my dad. And then to the my mother's side here is my sister Susan. And that's my daughter Marquis. And behind her is my son Bridger. And that's me. And this is Mark, their father. And over here is Hal, Susan's husband. And then off to my dad's side here is Patty in the back. And this is her daughter Jordan and son Joe and their father Rick. And that was taken quite a while ago. This is my dad's retirement party from First Western Bank in I should have this date in my head, but I think it was about 1989, somewhere in there. Is that about right? Yep. Anyway, my grandpa Walker had the Bear Butte Valley Bank from 1926 to 1969, and he sold it. And my dad worked for 5 different corporations and never left Sturgis, and First Western Bank being the last one. And he was really happy to retire because when I moved back here from Colorado, interest rates were 19%, and my father was in a really bad state of depression. And because he had to he was watching his ag friends go broke, and that was really hard for him. And the reason I put up the picture of the 1902 Cowboys over here is my great grandpa Hughes, my grandma Walker's father, was a 1902 cowboy. He's not in that picture, but that picture so replicates, when we had the cowboys, what was the open range, that's why they're called the 1902 Cowboys. So when we started fencing the West and having farms and ranches, and the Bear Butte Valley Bank was a very integral part of ranching and farming in this part of the country. And of course, I love one of the stories that my dad used to tell. He always called my grandpa Walker the old gent. And on Saturdays during the dirty 30s, and my dad's a kid, he's like 9 or 10 years old, but he said the old gent and I would go to the feed store and fill up the trunk with cattle cake. And then we would and he goes, and I had to shovel all that in there because nobody has and he said, and then we'd go to the country and we would deliver cattle cake to the old gent's customers. And then they always say, well, what are we going to owe you for this? And he goes, nothing, just keep those damn cattle alive. So anyway, he had a big heart. He took care of his people. And this is a fun picture of my Aunt Beth and my dad and my Uncle Herman and my Grandma Walker and my sister Susan and my mother Carol and my parents. And I think I was taking the picture, but something certainly made them happy that day. It was fun. I love those kinds of pictures. This is a picture of my sister Susan and her husband Hal Hockenstead. And I thought I had more pictures of my sister Susan, and I think she has them. But Susan, my older sister, graduated from USD, and she was one of the first lottery directors in the state of South Dakota. So I always tease her that she's going to hell anyway. Doesn't really matter what you did after that. Anyway, no. She did a good job, and that continues to bring a lot of money to our state. And then she went on to work for several different corporations in the gaming industry, and she retired like 5 years ago, and she lives in Henderson. She and Hal both live in Henderson, and they come spend their summers here. This was just, I don't know, we did this slideshow. This is an obituary picture of my dad, and he was in the Senate. I'm going to get those dates wrong. It was back in the 90s, wasn't it? Somewhere in there. For 4 years, he was in the Senate. His favorite job at the Senate was cooking in the Senate kitchen upstairs because the rest of it he just really didn't enjoy that much. Anyway, these are my children, and these are kind of old pictures too, but this is my daughter Marquise' family. Marquis and Travis and Scout and Aspen, and they live in Vermont now. Marquis is a nurse, Travis is a chef. This is my son Bridger and his wife Larissa and their family, River and Brecken on the back, and Bricks and Winnie in the front. And Bridger is a contractor in Sturgis. He has Bridger Construction, and Larissa works for a vacation rental management company. This is my sister Patty's son, Joe, and his wife Cody, and their children that live in Helena, Montana, and Sawyer, Sterling, and Stetson. I always think when they get mad, I can, as a mother, like, anyway, yeah. And Joe works in finance. He has his own consulting company now, and Cody has a child psychology company, and she helps people train children how to go to sleep earlier. And so I tell my son Bridger and Larissa when I babysit, you need to get these kids enrolled in Jody's class because they never like to go to bed. Neither did I. So anyway, this is Beth's children, a much younger picture. This is Sandra, Brent, and Mary Ellen. Old Christmas card, but aren't they just cute? And this is them as older. Sandra and Brent are both deceased, and this was a picture of Sandra that they just did in the Argus later because she was an amazing gardener. That is kind of the Walkers have a green thumb. I might not claim that myself, but I come from a line of gardeners. My grandpa and grandma gardened, my dad gardened, Herman gardened, my Aunt Beth gardened, and Sandra was an amazing gardener too. This is Brent, and he graduated from Brookings, and he's been deceased for a while. This is Sandra and Mary Ellen. And now I'm going to go to the next slide. This is Sandra's son, Nathan and Candy. They live in Sioux Falls, and these are their children, Daxon and McKenna. Nathan is a corporate tax attorney, and Candace works in finance too. This is Mary Ellen and her son TJ, and their children. What are their names? Beckham and Brent. Okay, got that. I had those in my notes, and then I'm like, it's easier to look at you and say, huh? This is a picture of Herman's 90th birthday. My Uncle Herman is 90 now, and off to the left is JB, his youngest son, Elizabeth, his daughter, Herman, his son Harold, and my Aunt Beth. And this is another picture next to them, Herman and Elizabeth and Walker, and this is his other daughter, Mary Michael. These are pictures of my cousin Harold. This is Herman's oldest son, and he had a distinguished military career. He retired as a full lieutenant colonel from the Wyoming National Guard, and he did time in Iraq. So this is some pictures of him in Iraq. This is a picture of he and his wife Rebecca at a formal dinner. And this is one of Walker's pictures in Iraq, and I don't know if he's trying to train that falcon or what, but anyway, he had a distinguished. He now works at Cabela's, so that's where you'll find him now. This is another picture of Herman and his daughter Elizabeth. This is a picture of Elizabeth and her daughter Ashley, who lives in London. Mm-hmm. And this is a picture of Elizabeth's son Dylan and his children Nora. And I'm going to get that right. I have to look at my notes. This is terrible, but sometimes you don't remember all your cousins' name, especially when they get to be second cousins and third cousins once removed, right? Yeah. Aspen and Nora, and then they have a son named Justin too, and he's not in this picture. And this is my cousin Harold. These are Casey's children that live at Elm Spring, the Matts, and so this is Lainey and Grady Matt, and this is. I need to go to the next picture here. This is Elizabeth's youngest daughter, Kelsey Johnson, and they live down by New Underwood, and these are her children, Barrett and Bodie. And then off to the right is Ashley's family. And so it's Ashley, Matthew, Jocelyn, and Evelyn. And there's one more in there too. Okay. Walker is his name. Good for you. These are slides of the Walker cabin. Probably one of the things I remember the most growing up is my parents loved to entertain at the Walker cabin. But after the far right are my grandpa and grandma Shaw. This is my grandpa and grandma Shaw. These are my mother's parents that ranched at White Owl, South Dakota. And the Shaw Ranch is in its third generation of ranching, actually going on fourth. And they were really important people in my life and all of the Walkers, wonderful people. And these are just random pictures at the cabin. But off to the far right was my dad on the 4th of July. We always made homemade ice cream. So that's Bridger and Ashley making the traditional homemade ice cream. And then there's always a lot of poker games going at the Walker cabin. And anyway, Picture of my grandma Walker and just a patio slide of the cabin. Does anybody want to ask any questions? I'm gonna back up to some of the banking stuff because there's a lot of people in here that I know that would like to ask questions about um, various things. Anybody? Yeah.
I worked in. Is this on? Oh, I worked in Pierre when you're in the Secretary of State's office when your dad was a legislator.
Okay.
And we so looked forward to his visits to our office. He was just so fun to talk to, and just, we enjoyed him so, and we think sometimes he just came in to talk to us. He had nothing to do there, but that's my remembrance of your father.
Yeah. My dad was a good visitor. He was also really, really very much involved in the community. If I went through all the accolades and all the boards that my dad served on, I would run out of breath. But yeah. Another question?
Well, I'm Clint Jolly. And I was just wondering, did anything happen in Meade County that didn't have your dad or grandfather's approval?
That I can't tell you. That I can't tell you. I do know that, back in the history of Sturgis and where it is now, I always say my grandpa Walker would roll over in his grave if he saw what the rally, became, because he gave Pappy his loan to start his first Indian motorcycle shop in Sturgis. Now, Pappy had business before that, like out in the Carl's barn and stuff like that, but he started his first Indian motorcycle shop in Sturgis. And then I grew up, because my dad and Pappy were good friends, so I grew up in the rally taking gate at the races, because that's what it really was. And neither my dad or my grandpa were into the bikes. I mean, neither my dad or my grandpa were mechanics, period. So anyway, but Pappy Hoyle's intention when he started his Indian motorcycle shop, or when he started doing what he did, was to help World War II veterans get across the country from PTSD and what they'd seen in war. And so he didn't really even take any money for some of the work that he did. And so the rally was that to begin with. So when people first started coming here and gathering in the neighborhood, it was just a little neighborhood thing. I remember as a little kid going to Pappy and Pearl's and take baked beans, and there was 15, 20 bikers. So now look at it. And I always kind of accuse my dad of starting the evolution of Main Street Sturgis, because Bob's Saddlery. Does anybody remember Bob's Saddlery? Right. So Bob had the same suits in his store sometimes for 5 years, and my dad said, "You got to put them on sale, Bob." "Nope, they're still good suits." And he's like, "You got to put them on sale anyway." So he was complaining about the bike rally because all these bikers just wanted biker boots, and they didn't want cowboy boots on my dad. So, "Well, I'll tell you what, Bob, I'll buy the boots and you sell them and we'll split the profit." So they did, and the next year Bob sold his own boots. Yeah. And then my dad said, "You had to take the window out and put a shoe shine girl in there," and then the rest is history, as they say sometimes. But my dad was a huge proponent of the rally as we knew it, as the races, because and it is a huge, I mean, it's the number one tourism in, it brings millions of dollars, not just to South Dakota or the state of South Dakota, but surrounding states too. So, but yes, my grandpa and the Walker family is in the Motorcycle Hall of Fame. So over on the corner, stuck back in the corner somewhere. But anyway, they were real integral in that. And of course, over the years, the controversy has been, do we need the rally? Do we need the rally? I'm like, well, we kind of do now, because, and when you see America today and main streets across America, if you're not corporate, you're not going to make it. So with Amazon and all the online stuff, it's like it's taken a lot out of main streets. And so it's not just the rally that destroyed Main Street Sturgis, in my opinion anyway, And look at the online stuff now. Pretty soon our insurance agents don't have offices, and banks don't have buildings. And anyway, I hope we don't go there. I'm rambling now.
When I got back from Vietnam, Bob Grams, sorry about that. When I got back from Vietnam in 1970, Sturgis still had Bear Butte Valley counter checks in every store. And I was big on using counter checks when I first came back, because most of my money from the Army went into the Bear Butte Valley Bank. And so I was writing counter checks for beer and whatever, partying. And before I left for my next assignment, I got a letter from Bruce. And your dad had very good handwriting.
Mm-hmm.
They don't teach cursive in school anymore, but Bruce had, he wrote a nice letter. And the letter was addressed to Robert Grams. And I opened it up, and here was Bruce's note. Bobby, just because you have counter checks doesn't mean you have money.
Right, right.
Well, I'm Beth Samansky Bauer, and having grown up in the Presbyterian Church with, Bruce and Carol, but we always joked because the floor needed to be replaced, I believe, in the kitchen in the church or something. And wouldn't you know, it had asbestos under it. So it was going to cost us a lot. And somehow, during the middle of the night, that floor disappeared. And it is rumored, and Carol to this day will say, I do not know. He must have done it at 3 in the morning. He must have got up, but it's
Really, I don't think I've ever heard that story,
Yeah.
but that would not surprise me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm David Richards. Some of you may remember me. When I came back from college, Eleanor and I got married, and we built a house and started out in the basement. But after it got built, I wanted to start a business selling eggs. So I heard some of the other young guys were getting government loans. So I went and talked to Harold, that's your grandfather. And he said, and I said, wondered if I could get a loan to build a chicken house. So he said, do you have any collateral? And I said, well, no. So he said, too bad.
Really?
So I had to build a chicken house out of straw bales and used material. And so when I got it built and operating, well, then he'd give me a loan.
Then he gave him a loan. Well, I guess he saw what you were made of, right? So my favorite story about my grandpa Walker, and I don't know if any of you ever remember Bill and Marie Hornerkamp, or John and Marie Hornerkamp that had Covered Wagon Resort in Piedmont. Okay. So John had come out here after World War II, and he had started Covered Wagon Resort, and he had borrowed money from my grandpa Walker. And chances are it could have been a government, anyway. So he had ran that for, I think, like 5 years or something. And then he went back to Missouri to visit his home, and he met Marie. They'd gone to school together. They'd never dated or anything, but they met, and Marie was a war widow. She had Bill Hornerkamp, who was Badlands and Lakes for a long time. Anyway. And they got married, and they came back here, and as good Catholics did, they had like 6 kids, bam, 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 bam. And John decided he wants to expand the campground, and Marie said, well, who's going to loan us money? And he said, well, we're going to go talk to Mr. Walker. So it's back in the Bear Butte Valley Bank, and there's no private rooms or anything. You can all kind of hear each other's business. So he's growling at somebody, and she's like, John, let's just go. He's just, let's just go. He's now Marie. His bark is a little worse than his bite. So it's their turn to talk to Mr. Walker, and what do you want? And John said, well, we want to borrow $5,000 because we're going to drill a well and build some more cabins and a swimming pool. And so HJ said, you got any collateral? And all they had was this old pickup. And so he gives it to him, and HJ just throws it back across the table, and he just starts writing. And Marie says, I just think we're in trouble. He's just going to turn us in or something Anyway, so he throws this check at John Hornerkamp, and he says, there. And it's for $10,000. And John said, well, Mr. Walker, I just wanted 5. And he said, you know what you ought to do? You ought to go buy a new car and load up all those damn kids and go on a vacation and see how they do it across the country and come back and do it that way. And so he goes, and pay me when you can. Pay me back when you can. So they left, and Marie's like, John, did he just tell us to buy a car and go on a vacation? And he said, I told you his bark was worse than his bite. Anyway, they love to tell me that story because Marie said it changed our life, and the kids remember it too because I got the panel station wagon where you headed backwards. But anyway, my grandpa came from his lineage. His father, unfortunately, became a very abusive alcoholic and kind of left his family in destitute. So it was my grandma Walker's brother, Pug, who took the family under his wing, and that's who really took my grandpa Walker under his wing. So I think my grandpa Walker, he had this level of sternness, but he also had this kind heart that he could mix the two. Anyway, and that's how HJ got to Sturgis, because Pug had invested in And so he'd send him to Nebraska for training, bank training, and then to the state of Montana, Bank of Montana. And then while he was up there, Pug said you can either go to Fremont, Nebraska or Sturgis. So he chose Sturgis. And my grandpa was very community oriented too, a lot of civic stuff. And my dad was that way too, served on Board of Education for 26 years and water board. And that was another big part of the Walker family in Sturgis was the water system because Davenport had, it was a privately owned water system. And so it served Sturgis for a long time. And then it was back in the 80s when my dad was still on that board. And the EPA wanted them to goonite the Davenport dams, meaning cover the dams before. So yeah, anyways, and he thought that was about the biggest bunch of hooligan. Anyway, for what it would have cost too. So he said it's, it was time for the transition, and that's when Sturgis started drilling wells and sold the water system to the city of Sturgis. And we still use those dams for our fire hydrants, but it's not potable. We don't drink that water. But yeah, so now Sturgis, I believe, has 6 wells. Just drilled a new one not so long ago. So yeah, both of my grandpa and my dad were pretty integral in a lot of those types of things that got done. Neither one of them really liked politics though. So my dad went to Senate as kind of as a deathbed wish for Bobby's dad. Bill was a senator for a long time, Senator Bill Grahams. And damn it, Bruce, you got to go anyway. So my dad went for 4 years, and I don't think he disliked all of it, but he just didn't like politics very well.
Okay, I'm sworn to secrecy on some of this, but Charlie Gray, excuse me. One time I tried to sell insurance for a living. If you looked up the worst insurance salesman in the state of South Dakota, you'd have seen Charlie Gray with the picture. Yeah. Anyway, Bruce gave me a tour of the bank one day. He said, well, as long as you're here, I'll walk you through the bank. So he took me through the bank, got done, and he said, I just tell you one thing, Charlie. He says, a good taste is soon forgotten. A bad taste stays in your mouth forever.
Funny.
That bank used to have a lot of lubdubbery up on the top. And the reason it isn't there now was one time a bad wind came, and it was in the middle of the afternoon, and some of that junk fell down on the sidewalk. Mm-hmm. And it was just lucky that no one was under it. So Dad took all of that ornate stuff off the top.
I will. I think Dave wanted to ask or share a story again.
Well, I might add that I came out of state college in 1950, so I'm a little older than most of you here. But Harold Walker, your grandfather, used to go out at least once a week into the country and see what was going on because he had a lot of loans out there. So he would visit different people, and he'd come out to Philippers and visit with them and different people around. So he had a pretty good idea what was needed and who was not doing what they're supposed to.
Yep, I don't know, my dad's, I spent a lot of hours with my dad driving around the country, and that, that's what, I guess what makes a good egg banker anymore. It's like, do they do that? I don't know. It's all on paper now. I know my dad used to say the 3 C's of loaning money used to be cash, collateral, and character, and not necessarily so much anymore, but it's how the world is. I helped my dad do books when I was a little kid. He did the church. Anyway, he has an adding machine that goes to $1 million. And he could just dance up and down it. And so when I was a kid, I said, what are you going to do if it's over $1 million? And he said, don't have to worry about that for a while. So I was telling Ross, I said, I see that adding machine in the corner of the basement, and I'm thinking about the debt, U.S.'s debt, and how many adding machines will go around the world, how many times with. It's incomprehensible. Beth wanted me to note that this is an old picture of the bank, and all this ornate stuff above the windows. A big wind came up one time years ago on the roof, yeah, and blew some of that off. So they removed a lot of it. And I don't know who owns this bank now. When I was a kid growing up, this is the bank underneath is the one my grandpa Walker built in 1969, which is now where the Fort Meade Credit Union, Northern Hills Credit Union is. And this bank has changed hands several times since then. We had our art center in there for a while. But when I was growing up, in this corner window at the top was Dr. Riedessel's. Ooh, did you ever go to Dr. Riedessel? Had all my baby teeth filled with no Novocaine. Yeah. So I came home one day and I was upset. I was about 13 and I said, I am not going back. And my mom said, he's a friend of ours. I said, he's a friend of yours. So anyway. Anyway, God bless him. We called him the white knuckle dentist because he kind of waited till your knuckles got really white and then he asked you if that kind of hurt, you know. Yeah. Yeah. He says, your dad never needed any Novocaine. I'm like, oh, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, we're off the path now.
Dr. Woods had his office right above. Well, there's the door and the two windows, and that was Dr. Woods.
Yeah, can you
The
talk into
dental-
the mic a little bit more, Beth? Because the other doctor before Rita So was Dr. Woods. And
Oh,
yeah.
Dr. Woods. That was Dr. Woods' office, and Dr. Riddisel was down upstairs, but down the aisle. And I don't know how old people got up there because there was no elevator. You had to go in that back door down below and go upstairs to the two dentists, Dr. Riedesel and Dr. Woods, who were up on the top of the bank. And I don't know how old people got up there at all. And my dad's office was right in those front windows down there. And my mother used to say to him, Harold, you know, you should be in the back of the bank in the director's office because people that come in to borrow money and talk, there's no privacy. And he would not pay one bit of attention to her because he wanted to sit there and see what went on Main Street and the cross. Yeah. But he was in the director's office when the bank was robbed. And he was visiting with a man, and Irene Lodge came back into the director in the back of the bank to the director's office, and she said, Mr. Walker, the bank has been robbed. And my dad just kept talking to his, and she raised her voice and she said, Mr. Walker, the bank has been robbed. And he said, well, I'll be damned. And it was a fellow from Belfouche that had worked in the beet fields. And he had stolen the car. And he came down, and it was it was about noon. And he parked on that east side. And he went in, and he went up to the front where Fred Christensen was the head cashier with his gun. Well, the man had a mask on his face like he'd been injured, and he had a hunting jacket with pockets in it. And he had his gun, and he said to Fred, money, and Jack Kelly, money, and Jack was shaking, and he's shaking, his chin shaking. And I think Mildred Hoofendick was the only lady teller. But he got all the money down, and out the back door he went, and he got in his car, and he dropped a package of bills. Some lady picked it up, and she said, Mister, you've dropped some money. Anyway, he didn't stop. He got almost to the river before they caught him. Yeah. Got the money back, and of course he went to jail.
What year was that?
I'm not good on dates, but I remember because I worked in the bank before your dad did.
Okay.
I wanted to work at Wiggs Lunch in the worst way, and every girl in high school wanted to work at Wiggs Lunch, and my mother wouldn't let me, and my dad said, if you want to work, get down to the bank. And I just hated it. The bank had no machines, and I had to sit in the back and type all the remittances, type and put them in envelopes. That was my job. Oh, it was terrible.
Boring. Yeah, boring. Yeah, I think we're going to do a bank thing too, but we brought some banking stuff over here. And
Wilson Sweeney and I, just about 3 days out of the week, would have to sit on high stools and go through the teller's tapes because that bank had to balance to the penny every day before Dad would close it.
Yep.
And he would read the tapes, and I'd check the other one, and then when he got tired, I'd read the tapes, and we'd find the penny. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems crazy, but that's how it is. Yeah, yeah.
I was talking to Bruce one day after they sold out to American, and he wasn't in a very good mood because the board had been ragging on him about his cattle loans. So he told me, he said, I finally had enough. He said, do you guys know where all your cars are? I know where all my cows are.
Yeah, yeah. I know my father died in 2003, and I had so many people come up to me at his funeral with tears rolling down their face. If it wasn't for your dad, we would have lost our ranch. We would have lost our ranch. And of course, a lot of those people had gone through the insane interest rates of the 80s. And so I'm like, yeah, it's like, and now, people's hands just get tied more and more in different ways. But, you believe in those people, and that's why you want them to keep going. That's part of what the industry was about. So, and I know he told a lot of people, no, I didn't think you could borrow money. I was pretty sure you had to save for everything because I never got a loan. But anyway, I did later in life, too many of them. But yeah. Anyway, they were pretty frugal. Pretty frugal. Yeah. Does somebody else have something they wanted to share?
Yeah, Janine, I got some questions for you just from
Okay.
conversations that you and I had. Um, I would like to know how naughty they were.
Oh, I haven't told any
Told-
Bruce and
you
Beth
told me a
stories yet,
story,
have
yeah.
I? I said I'm going to tell some Bruce and Beth stories now about when they were little. Okay, so they were twins. Okay, and it was quite a surprise to both my grandpa and grandma Walker, not expecting twins. So they had extra help. My auntie Mary, my grandpa Walker's sister Mary Ellen, who was married to Harold Anderson, that had H.O. Anderson Hardware. They didn't have any children, so Auntie Mary was helped. And then my grandma Walker's mother died when my Aunt Marge, the youngest, was very young. So my Aunt Marge came and spent a lot of time with them too to take care of Bruce and Beth. So they were well cared for, and as they got older, they were quite adventurous. And so one of my favorite stories was when they were, I think it was Easter, and they were all in their Easter outfits, of course, and Pop Walker just bought a new Buick, and it's in the garage. But it also bought some paint to paint what was he going to paint? The well or some, anyway. Yeah, so it was like acrylic paint, like to paint screens and storm doors and things like that. So I guess my dad had the bright idea that he and Beth should paint the new car. So they did. Yeah, all around as far as they could reach up. And then my Auntie Mary came out because, of course, they're inside, setting the perfect Easter table. And my Auntie Mary came out to get little Bruce and Beth to come and eat. And she's like, oh my, oh my. So she goes and gets my grandma Walker, who comes out and says, oh my, oh my. 'Cause- yeah. Grandma Walker just started crying, and then HJ showed up. And we can only imagine. And then Beth said when they were trying to clean the paintbrushes, they put him through the well. There was like a wheel to try to get it clean. So then the paint went all over them. So yeah, I can only imagine what that must have been. I'm sure you didn't paint the car again, but yeah. So just when you think your kids are naughty, yeah. And then my grandma Walker liked to tell the story too that in the neighborhood down around the corner there was a little girl, and anyway, that house is still there, but it was a doctor and his wife and their children. And anyway, this little girl had beautiful long blonde hair and wore it in braids. And Grandma said, I looked out one day and here's Bruce and Beth on both sides of the little girl cutting off her braids with paper scissors, And she goes, and your dad was really good at it because that side was already gone and Beth hadn't quite gotten the other side off. So of course she had to take the little girl home and explain to the mom that she did let her kids have scissors, but she didn't think they were going to cut hair. So yeah, I was going to go back to the bank a little bit too because I think I see only one person in here that worked with my dad is Dee Dee LaRue, and yeah, they had it was a lot of camaraderie in the bank. I think they had a lot of fun. And my parents used to have cabin parties, and this is one of my favorite stories from the cabin party era. This was back in the 70s, and my mother liked to wear wigs back then. It was kind of a vogue thing anyway, so she liked to wear wigs, and nobody knew she was wearing a wig. Must have been a good one, right? Anyway, and they're at a cabin party, and Dee Dee's husband Maury, and so they had coolers set up where the cabin was, and there was kind of like an embankment that went down. But anyway, they had coolers sitting along there, and they were sitting around talking and laughing and stuff. And Somebody made my mother laugh so hard she threw her head back and the cooler tipped over backwards and she went into the gully and she came back out without her wig on. And Maury LaRue said, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. He's like, he thought maybe she'd been scalped by something in the, yeah. My mother would kill me if she heard me tell that story too. Probably shouldn't have. But anyway, it always makes me laugh because I don't know how many times Maury told that story, Maury and Dee Dee. And anyway, that was one of those belly laughers. Yeah. Aunt Beth has another. Oh, Tom's going to tell a story now. Oh, just a second.
Tom Herman. We can all appreciate that the tendency to be fascinated by cutting hair is passed down through the generations.
Well, my mother was expecting my younger brother Herman, and Bruce and I were always in trouble. And after one of our escapades, Mother said to my dad, would you please go up to the academy and ask the sisters if they will take those twins? And she said, and Dad went up and they said, well, we'd be glad to have them. So that's how we ended up in St. Martin's Academy when we were 4 years old in kindergarten. And our kindergarten teacher was a sister of Dan Regan that had the filling station down on Junction. And all she did really was read to us. But we learned to read at a very early age because she really taught us. But anyway, we were in the academy, and we weren't Catholic, but we took Catholic communion at 8 o'clock until 8:30 when school started. And I was in the 4th grade, and I went home and I told my mother I had to have a white dress. And she said, well, what for? And I said, well, all the girls are having white dress, and we're going to be join the church. Oh, no, Mother said, no, you're not. We aren't Catholic. And they had quite a time with me because I just insisted that I was going to get this white dress and go with the rest of the girls. And my dad came home and he said, I'll take those kids and they can go. We were just about in the 5th grade to the public school. Well, that lasted about 1 week because Bruce was the troublemaker. And Miss Jackson, I can remember, she was our teacher, and she had a load of books and papers, and she was going down the aisle to put the books in the back of the room, and Bruce stuck his foot out and tripped her. And she fell right smack dab on her face, and the papers just flew all over. And I cried because I thought, oh, what's going to happen now? And Miss Jackson got up and went down to R.B. Williams. He was the principal. And R.B. came up and picked Bruce up and took him down to the office and called my dad and said, Mr. Walker, it's business time, but you come up here. I want you to know what your son has done. And anyway, that was the end of public school. We were back in the academy. We were there until the 8th grade. And then we got to go to public school because Bruce wanted to play football. And I had to go where Bruce went, yeah. So, yeah.
I'd forgotten the story behind that. And so to segue off that, my dad had to wear knickers. Yeah, and so he got beat up. He got teased every night coming home from school, and he'd get beat up. And then my grandma would mend his knickers so he could go back to school the next day. So he told HJ, the old Jenny, goes, I am not going across that graduation stage in knickers. If I can't have long pants, I'm not going. So he got long pants.
This is a story that Beth told me some time ago, and it has to do with this first picture up here of the bank and those big windows. And she said her dad insisted on sitting up there in the front. And when she would get out of school, she didn't want her dad to know that she was out and had been doing whatever mischief it was that day. And so she and another little girl, she told me, they would always crawl underneath those two big windows there so he wouldn't see them.
I can just see that. I can just see that. Yeah. Yeah.
This is kind of the going to the banking thing. You talked to me last night about loading up some cake in the back of a trunk.
Did I tell? I already told that story, didn't I?
Did you? Okay.
Yeah,
missed
yeah.
that.
When my grandpa Walker would go out and give cake to
Yeah,
his customers in the
I
country.
always thought
Yeah.
that was
So.
cool. And
Yeah,
the
he
other one
kept-
you told me was about the bank during the 30s.
Well, my grandpa Walker's bank was one of the only banks that didn't close in the crash. West River was one of the only banks that didn't close. Yeah. No, and that's why it had to balance to the penny, So, and I can't tell you all the reasons behind that. It was a weird time, you're supposed to send all your gold back, and lots of different rules and regulations. And I'd like to research that more, but his bank did not close, so nobody lost their money, and it was a big deal. It was a really big deal, And I can remember too, because I used to clean the bank when I was in high school, and that would be this new bank over here, the one at the bottom. And the whole back room was the bookkeeping, right? And that was back when they still did a bunch of stuff, with machines, but they still had all the bookkeepers upstairs. But they brought in this huge computer system, took up the whole back room, and my dad was so mad. And because all the bookkeepers had to go to the basement. And he said, "Look at all this." And he had some other expletives that I'll leave out of it. "Look at all this." Rah. He said, "Someday there won't be any money. It'll all be on this stuff," right? And I remember one time too, because he worked for 5 different corporations, and one of them was like the incentives to open a checking account or something, and so they'd give away a toaster or an iron or something like that, and oh man, that made him mad. Now we're running a hardware store, because then they bring it back because it didn't work, Anyway, all those things. Yeah, I remember like talking about after school, so the bank here, and if you remember that, and the teller used to be out across the alley, so there was that tunnel that went under the bank to the teller. And so my cousin Kim, her mother, Leslie Jane, worked in the bank too. So after school, we would come down to the bank. But what we really like to do is bring our friends along and trap them in that tunnel till they screamed, and then we let them out. My dad came down one time. "Now you girls stop it," And we did. We stopped. When my dad said stop, we stopped. The buck stopped there, right? Yeah. So this is one of the stories that my mother liked to tell, because I was the youngest of 3 girls. My parents lost a little boy after me, so I became my dad's boy. And I lived to go to the ranch with my dad on Saturday mornings because he let me drive. And I'm, 10. And so the routine was he'd shift into 4th gear right past Fort Meade, and then he'd go clear over to the side, and we had this big pillow, so I'd get up there. Of course, it's the big, you're steering, looking through the steering wheel. And then my dad would fall asleep. And I can remember one time meeting this trucker, and I'm sure he thought he'd been on the road too long because he's just met a cyclops. But yeah, I still remember the look on that guy's face. But yeah, so this was Julie Eddington that grew up the street from me, and it was after school, and I think it was about 10, maybe, yeah. And it was springtime, and it was time to get our bicycles out, but the tires were low, so I went inside and asked Mom if we could take him down to Dick's Station, and she said sure. But I didn't say we're going to put him in the back of the Mercury, but we did. And we backed out, and we got to Dick's Station, and we got air in the tires. But Dick called my mom, meanwhile. And he said, "Carol, did you know Janeen's down here getting air in the bicycle tires?" And she said, "Yes." And he goes, Do you know she's driving the Mercury?" And my mother's like, "What?" So as Julie Eddington and I are driving back into the garage, and my dad, who never came home from work, was home from work. Yeah. And I looked at Julie and I said, "This isn't good. This isn't good." And she's screaming at my dad, "Well, if you wouldn't let her drive, she wouldn't think she can drive." No. Anyway, yeah, I learned a lesson. Yeah, can't get a real license till you're 14 now. So anyway, but I didn't sideswipe the garage or anything. Both of my sisters did at one point, right? But anyway, yeah, silly things, right? Oh, Lynn.
Yeah, I'm Lynn Hendrickson from Sturgis. When you talked about the fact that the bank did not close when the Depression hit, and the reason that one of the reasons why the Bear Butte Bank did not close was because they saw the runs on the bank in other places. So Harold called Jarvis Davenport, who was a very influential man here in Sturgis, as you all well know. Banks had to maintain cash reserves, and in those days, banks were almost all cash in their operation. So they had a large amount of cash in the bank that they knew was going to get a run on. People were going to come to draw their money out. So Harold and Jarvis put all the money in a big burlap sack, and Jarvis put it in the front seat of his 27 Cadillac and put a 45 Schofield revolver on the top of the bag and drove it to the Federal Reserve office in Rapid City and deposited it there. So that was why the bank in Sturgis remained solvent.
Thank you. I knew the story was like that. Thank you, Lynn. I knew there was this interesting story. Yeah, thank you. And that's why, yeah. Does anybody know the story of when Ladd, the guy that was the bank that it got robbed and he got shot? You know, we need to research that too, but that's another interesting bank story. Might even been before Pop. I don't know, but anyway. Does anybody have anything else, or I don't even know what time it is. Oh, Carla. Okay. What time is it?
My name is Carla Bell Alexander. This is my sister Gwendolyn Alexander Spire, and we had to come today because Bruce was a huge part of our childhood. You talk about the bank closing. When the crash happened, my grandfather had moved here when he was a teenager, had $20 in his back pocket, and he was supposed to go to Sturgis to another bank. Never knew the name because he wouldn't even mention it, but was supposed to take that 20 to the bank. The markets crashed, and that $20 was all the money his family had for the next period of time. As soon as that bank reopened, he took all of his money to Bear Butte Valley. And my dad got his first loan at 14 to lease land, which was unimaginable to me then when I was 14. Now I can't even. I mean, he was leasing and farming and harvesting at 14 and still going to high school, though not regularly. Yeah, Buzz Glenn Alexander.
Mm-hmm.
But Dad would go into the bank. He said that his relationship with your grandpa was okay. He was a little gruff, but he was terrified of Bruce. Now, if you knew Buzz Alexander was 325, pure farmer muscle, 6'2", 6'3", somewhere in there. He hated going into the bank because if something was wrong, Bruce got vocal, shall we say. And sometimes Dad could hear Bruce at the front door. Oh, Alexander, you're in here. But Dad said the thing about Bruce was you knew when you walked into the room, he knew what your operation was, what you needed, what he could forward you. And he said if you weren't careful, Bruce Walsh you right into trouble because Bruce had that kind of faith in his people.
Mm-hmm.
He said Dad always felt he stayed within that part. But there was one time that Dad couldn't get to town. He was doing something. They needed some banking business done. He asked my mother to go. And Mom was like, I'm not going to go see Bruce. No, I don't want to go down there. Yeah, she was a year younger than Beth and Bruce. She'd said she went to high school with him. Dad's like, what's the deal? When she went into the bank, Bruce did the same thing he did with all women, I hear. He was very polite, very gentle, got the business done, called Dad up and said, what the hell was that? You sent your wife in.
I will also segue off that too, because my dad worked with a lot of, ranchers, and he was very much in tune, like they were partners. So if the man would come in and wanted a tractor loan, he goes, your wife's got to come in too. She's got to sign the note. Well, she doesn't need to know about it. Yes, she does. And there was times when he would say, if you let the woman run things, sometimes it's better. But anyway, yeah. Yeah, those are all interesting stories. And my dad, back to Buzz Alexander, never bought a car from anybody else but Buzz Alexander, right? When your dad sold cars, I remember. And my dad hated to trade cars. Oh, it was like pulling teeth, Nothing wrong with this one, but anyway. But he always went to Buzz to get the different car. They really did, yeah. Yeah. He was a real fair guy. Or I thought he was anyway. Yeah. Anybody else have anything to comment on? I feel I went kind of through all that fast, but we didn't want to get too.
Well, we want to thank you for an excellent program. Thank you to all you that came and enjoyed it.
Once again, I'd like to thank Richard, because if it weren't for Richard, we wouldn't do any of this. And he's a good disciplinarian. It was good for me to And I said to my Aunt Beth, I said, I'm going to finish this archiving thing, and I'm going to close with this genealogy. How many in here have done their genealogy in their families? Yeah. And so my mom's cousin, Betty Peters, she just gave me volumes of genealogy, and it would be my grandma Shaw's side of the family. And she said to me, she said, Janeen, now if you start to do this, it's very addictive. So you have to be sure you have enough time to do this, because it'll be 3 o'clock in the morning and you won't even realize it's 3 in the morning. I'm like, got it. And now doing this, I kind of get that now when you start getting interested. So thank you all for sharing today. I learned things I didn't know about, like the details why the bank didn't close. I knew there was something with going to Rapid City with cash, but I didn't know the whole story, Lynn. Thank you. And for all of you that shared, and my Aunt Beth for making sure I got the story right. I didn't go to too many dates and details. I did skip over the fact my dad did serve in the military. He was in the Korean conflict, but he didn't have to go to Korea. And that was a blessing. But the joke for my dad always was they made him the head of a mechanical department in Panama, which is where my sister Susan was born. So we always called her Panamanian Dutch if we wanted to make her mad. But anyway, and they kept her a surprise. They didn't tell anybody. So when they came home, they had this, the first grandchild, which was really fun, wasn't it? But anyway, Susan was born in Panama, and my dad was the head of a mechanical fleet. And I just have to tell you this funny story, because neither my grandpa or my dad were mechanics of any kind. And so one day the old gent called up to my dad, and he goes, the car won't start. My dad says, why? He goes, I don't know. So we go down, and the 55 Chevy had no oil in it. So my dad and I put 5 quarts of oil in it, and it started again. Yeah, but anyway, so I always thought that was funny. My dad was the head of a mechanical. My dad said, I just did the accounting part of it. They didn't ask me to work on engines. So, and then my mother's side of the family, the Shaws, they're all motorheads. So I got that balance when I worked on the Shaw Ranch, so, how to grease a tractor. Anyway, thank you all for coming, and it was fun to have to do this. It was. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you.